One of the challenges that every parent must face is teaching their children to manage personal responsibilities, including doing chores and completing homework. Unfortunately, it's often tempting to resort to short-term solutions such as pleading, demanding, or even bribing kids to take action. However, these approaches only tend to make things more difficult over the long term, and they risk damaging the relationship, trust, and influence that you have with your kids. So let's explore 5 powerful tips for how to more effectively teach your kids to do chores, homework, and other important activities. Beginning with tip number 1, turn responsibilities into predictable routines. Before solving a problem, it's often very helpful to start at the end by clarifying our desired outcome. In this case, the goal is to help our children manage their household responsibilities independently. We don't want to be reminding them to do things or always have to take time to keep them accountable. Otherwise, they will continue to depend on our oversight and may even struggle when they eventually move out on their own. The solution is to turn our children's responsibilities into automatic habits. This involves converting random or haphazard tasks into predictable routines, just like waking up, brushing one's teeth, or eating breakfast. That way, kids no longer view chores or homework as things that need to be fit into the day, but rather as consistent parts of their normal automatic routine. The challenge, of course, is that starting a new habit can be difficult. Even as adults, there are many things that we genuinely want to do that we ultimately fail to follow through on, such as starting an exercise or reading habit. Fortunately, there are proven strategies for turning almost any activity into an automatic routine. The first step is to simply recognize the value of doing so. That way, we're willing to invest the time and the effort required to make it happen. With that in mind, let's continue on to tip number 2. Understand the basics of behavioral change. Before we can help our kids build new habits, we must understand the 3 factors behind all behavioral change: motivation, ability, and a prompt. Each of these elements must be present for a new behavior to take place, according to renowned social scientist B.J. Fogg. They're the core building blocks behind everything we do, including casual activities like watching television, browsing social media, or even cooking dinner. If any of the 3 factors are missing, then we won't engage in the relevant behavior. So let's quickly look at all 3 elements more closely. The first is motivation. We must have a reason to take action. For example, we may be motivated by fun, enjoyment, pleasure, acceptance, praise, satisfaction, hope, or an increase in freedom. We may also be driven by a chance to reduce negative outcomes, including pain, fear, rejection, boredom, or a loss of control. Next is ability. We must have what it takes to engage in the new habit or behavior. This might include having enough time, money, strength, knowledge, confidence, or experience. Critically, the easier it is to do something, the more likely we will do it. Finally, every behavior requires a prompt. We must have some kind of nudge or reminder to get us to take action. In some cases, this might involve an internal trigger, such as a feeling of hunger, loneliness, or exhaustion. In other cases, this might involve an external trigger, such as an alarm, a reminder from a friend, or a linked activity. These 3 elements form the Fogg behavioral model. B equals MAP, or behavior equals motivation, ability, and a prompt. Now, many parents intuitively understand the importance of motivation. However, many tend to rely on just 1 or 2 strategies. For example, they may bribe their child with a reward or threaten them with a punishment. However, parents that take the time to truly understand the Fogg behavioral model have many more tools at their disposal, especially those that understand the crucial relationship between motivation and ability. So with that in mind, let's continue on to tip number 3, how to help kids establish a new chore. When a task is easy, it requires very little motivation to get somebody to do it. And furthermore, as someone repeats a new behavior, their ability to engage in that activity increases, enabling them to take on greater and greater responsibility over time. Therefore, the most effective way to establish a new habit is to start very small and focus on consistency. In practice, this involves identifying the gap between someone's existing behavior and the desired behavior, and then identifying a small change that will subtly shift their routine a little bit closer to that desired behavior. For example, let's say that you want your kids to rinse off their dishes and put them into the dishwasher after every meal. Furthermore, let's say that their existing behavior is they get up from the table without making any effort to clean up at all. In such a case, you might start with a small, simple request such as, when you get up from the table, can you please put your dishes into the sink? Then, each time they do so, you can reinforce the behavior by saying, thank you for helping with the dishes, or I appreciate your help clearing the table. Now, if you're used to telling your kids exactly what to do and when to do it, this may all seem wildly inefficient. After all, the dishes are now in the sink, they didn't get rinsed off, nor did they end up making it to the dishwasher. Furthermore, it may take several days or even weeks before your kids are consistently taking just this first small step. However, let's quickly break down why this method is so incredibly effective. First, we established a clear prompt by linking the new behavior to the moment when our kids get up from the table. Second, we started with a simple request that requires very little motivation or ability. And finally, we reinforced the change by providing an appropriate level of praise after they completed the simple request. This process lays a rock-solid foundation for a reliable habit. The resulting behavior will quickly become automatic, and the initial praise that was used to reinforce the behavior quickly becomes optional as the habit begins to take hold. And most important of all, we can continue to build on this foundation to build a more robust and useful routine. Once kids consistently incorporate the new habit, you can follow up with another small change. For example, you might say, when you take your dishes to the sink, can you please take a moment to rinse them off? Once again, you can reinforce the change by offering up an appropriate level of praise once they complete the new behavior. For example, by saying, thank you for rinsing off the dishes, or I appreciate how helpful you've become. To be clear, with each change, you may need to remind them several times before they incorporate the latest change into their routine. Furthermore, if they're doing a poor job, you may need to provide additional guidance, such as showing them how to use a kitchen sponge to more effectively clear off their dishes. Once again, the focus is on taking small steps consistently. That way, their ability steadily increases, even as their need for motivation and praise steadily decreases. The next natural step, of course, is to ask kids to place their dishes into the dishwasher after they're done rinsing them. Now, in some cases, kids might even go out of their way to complete this last step entirely on their own, out of a desire to show you just how helpful they can be. And in fact, one way that you can increase the odds of this happening is by subtly modeling the behavior when it comes to clearing your own dishes from the table. That way, they can see what the next natural step in the progression might be. Just remember, there are 3 critical things to keep in mind before introducing new steps. First and foremost, don't make a change until the existing routine is consistent. Second, every new change should continue to be a very small, subtle shift in their existing behavior. And third, make sure to reinforce the latest change with an appropriate level of praise after they've incorporated that change into the routine. Let's continue on to tip number 4. How to help kids build a homework routine. One of the challenges with homework is that it's less predictable than other chores. On any given day, a child may have more or they may have less to do. Furthermore, unlike other habits, it's not appropriate to build a homework routine by starting with only part of the task because, of course, kids are expected to complete all of their homework each day. Fortunately, we can still make things easier by considering the various factors in the FOG behavioral model, which again include motivation, ability, and a prompt. A quick way to bring order to the chaos is to establish a clear time and place for children to complete their homework. While duration may vary from day to day, we can make things easier by establishing a clear prompt. For example, they can begin immediately after returning home from school, right after eating dinner, or even at a set time using an alarm. Naturally, it's best to choose an option that is consistent across as many days of the week as possible. Having a predictable location is just as important. For example, kids can do their homework at a dinner table or at a desk in their bedroom. Just keep in mind, it's best to choose a space that is always available and that has as few distractions as possible. That way, it takes less of their effort to remain focused. Remember, the easier it is to do something, the more likely people will do it. By creating a predictable and distraction-free environment, you steadily lower the amount of ability that is required to follow through on the behavior, and that, in turn, reduces the amount of motivation that is needed to take action, creating a virtuous cycle. Beyond improving predictability, we can also be helpful by remaining nearby to answer questions. This is another way in which we can address potential issues around ability. Now, of course, we need to avoid being drawn into doing the work itself, but we can and should let our children know that we are available to answer questions and point them in the right direction when they hit a clear roadblock. Of course, none of this will have an impact if a child lacks motivation. So with that in mind, let's explore some creative ways to inspire our children to take action with tip number 5, what to do when kids lack motivation. One of the key revelations of the FOG behavioral model is the strong link between motivation and ability. The more ability a behavior requires, the more motivation is needed to do it. That is why, up until this point, we've placed such a huge emphasis on making things easier. Doing so is almost always more effective than adding motivation, especially when it comes to building self-sufficient habits that are designed to last. With that said, motivation is still a critical factor. No matter how much we simplify things, a child will not act if they don't have a good reason to do so. Now, for very young children, simple rewards can go a very long way. However, as kids grow older, it's essential that we increasingly rely on more meaningful and substantive incentives that are likely to stand the test of time. Some of the best forms of motivation include intrinsic motivation, personal identity, praise or recognition, fun or entertainment, and freedom or autonomy. So let's explore each one in a little more detail, starting with intrinsic motivation. Certain activities provide their own reward. For example, reading is intrinsically motivating to those that enjoy exploring new information. Next is personal identity. When someone identifies as being helpful, healthy, or punctual, their identity alone often provides enough motivation for them to follow through on related activities. And the same can be true of many other traits or virtues that people link with their personal identity. Next up is praise or recognition. It feels good when people recognize or praise our actions, and better still, this kind of praise can help to shape or reinforce our personal identity, which again provides a renewable source of motivation for related behaviors. Next is fun or entertainment. When a task or behavior is fun or can be made fun, that alone can increase the motivation to participate. Last but not least, freedom or autonomy. When the completion of one behavior unlocks attractive new options elsewhere in life, people are more likely to take action. In effect, they're trading a little bit of freedom now for increased freedom in the future. Now, as parents, we should always be looking for motivators that are naturally linked with the desired behavior, rather than simply turning to arbitrary punishments or rewards. So, when considering a new habit or routine, ask yourself, does the behavior relate to a positive trait or uplifting identity that could be praised after a child takes action? Would the routine be more enjoyable if turned into a game, contest, or group activity? What are the natural positive outcomes that result from the behavior? What new freedoms or options are made possible by completing the routine? What is there to lose if they fail to take responsibility? Is it clear that the loss would be tied to their failure to act rather than being an arbitrary punishment? Such questions can help us discover motivators that are a natural fit for the behavior we are trying to establish. And by finding the right kind of motivation, we can increase the odds that the change will stick and that it will not require further oversight in the future. For example, clearing the dishes is linked with positive traits such as being helpful organized, or responsible. Thus, if a child has shown signs of taking pride in one or more of these traits, it can be beneficial to make the connection explicit by saying something like, "Thank you for clearing the dishes. I appreciate your efforts to keep our home so organized." Not only does this approach reaffirm the positive view that they have of themselves, but it also gives them an extra opportunity to apply themselves in a helpful way. So, with everything that we've covered here, I recommend that you begin today with one new habit or routine. Remember to start small and focus on consistency. Don't try to change everything all at once. Begin by identifying one new habit that would have the greatest impact for your child, such as starting a new homework routine, and then look for ways to address their need for motivation, ability, and a prompt. And finally, remember that casual praise is an effective tool for reinforcing new habits. Now, with that said, not all praise is beneficial. The right kind of praise can help a child adopt positive behaviors and take on bigger challenges, whereas the wrong kind of praise can make it more likely that they will avoid difficult tasks and even quit when the going gets tough. So, I published a video covering 4 practical tips for how to praise a child with words. It's a natural follow-up to the many insights covered in this video, so I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in learning how to use praise to guide the growth and development of your child. I'll include a link right here in the video player, as well as down below in the video description text.